Hey there. So it seems like you're really interested in self-improvement, huh?
Yeah.
And the excerpts you shared from Cognitive Awakening, really interesting stuff. You're clearly digging into some seriously cool concepts about how our brains work. So get ready because we're about to take a deep dive into some of the book's most powerful ideas. Things like how we can finally overcome those sneaky default settings we all have, how to unlock the power of patience, and no, it's not what you think. And we'll even explore some techniques for tapping into the wisdom of your subconscious mind. Don't worry, this isn't going to be like a boring book report. We're pulling out all the juiciest bits to make these ideas really stick.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read. One of the things I find really refreshing about this book is how Zhu Ling can break down these complex concepts into practical tools anyone can use. And he doesn't just tell you what to do, he actually takes the time to explain the why behind it all, which I think is so important for creating lasting change, don't you think?
Totally. It's like knowing why you keep hitting that snooze button every morning is way more helpful than just listening to another lecture on willpower, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of willpower, the book dives right into this really cool idea of the triune brain. It's basically this concept that we've got three brains all packed into one. The instinctive brain, which is, get this, 360 million years old. Ah, I know, right? Then there's the emotional brain, which is a sprightly 200 million years young. And last but not least, we have the rational brain, the new kid on the block at only 250,000 years old.
Haha, the new kid on the block. I like that.
It's kind of wild when you think about it, right? It's like you've got this ancient instinct-driven reptile, this more emotionally charged monkey, and this, well, I guess, relatively inexperienced but well-intentioned human all sharing the same skull.
And that's honestly a pretty accurate analogy for the internal struggles we all face, right? I mean, the book even points out that this is a big part of why we often know better, but still find ourselves reaching for that cookie jar instead of those carrot sticks.
Oh, tell me about it. That instant gratification monkey is strong.
It really is.
Okay, so just to recap, we've got this ancient reptile brain that's completely hardwired for survival. Its main goals in life are seeking pleasure and avoiding pain at all costs. Then we've got this emotional brain that's craving connection and comfort. And finally, we have our poor rational brain trying desperately to make sense of it all, to impose some order on the chaos, to steer the ship, so to speak.
Right.
It's no wonder self-control can sometimes feel like an epic battle. So how do we even begin to level the playing field? I mean, where do we even start?
Well, one thing the book really emphasizes is that simply understanding this dynamic is a huge first step. Just realizing that your rational brain, the one that's responsible for things like logic, planning, and delayed gratification, is actually the weakest of the three, can actually take some of the pressure off.
Wait, so it's not just me being lazy. You're telling me my brain is literally wired to prioritize that instant dopamine hit over, like, long-term goals and stuff? Huh. Well, that's both terrifying and strangely comforting at the same time.
I know, right? But it's important to remember that it's not about suppressing our instincts and emotions completely. They serve important purposes too. Instead, what Zhu Ling encourages us to do is to become more aware of these different voices in our heads, to get curious about them, and to learn how to manage them more effectively. He uses this great analogy of the brain as a company, with the rational brain as like a young, often disregarded manager.
Oh, I love that. And we all know what happens when those seasoned department heads' instinct and emotion start calling the shots. Total chaos.
Right.
So I guess what you're saying is that it's about the rational brain stepping up and leading with, well, rationality.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, right?
It is. It definitely is. But it is possible. And one of the first hurdles we often encounter on this journey of self-improvement, once we set out to improve ourselves, is this feeling of anxiety. It's that nagging feeling that we're not doing enough, that we're not progressing fast enough, and we end up constantly comparing ourselves to others. Have you ever felt that?
Oh, tell me about it. I remember when I first started getting serious about self-improvement, I felt this intense pressure to do everything all at once. It was like the more I learned, the more inadequate I felt.
Yes. That makes total sense. It's so common.
It's like I'd gone on this crazy shopping spree for a whole new wardrobe, but then immediately felt completely overwhelmed by all the choices and the thought of actually having to wear all those clothes.
I love that analogy. It's so true. Zhu Ling actually calls this the awakening year. And honestly, when I read that section, it really resonated with me on such a deep level.
Me too. So how do we navigate this awakening year without getting completely overwhelmed by all those anxieties?
Well, the book breaks down anxiety into 5 key types, and I think understanding these can be really helpful. The first is completion anxiety, so that feeling of being completely overwhelmed by how much you want to do, all those goals you want to achieve. Then there's positioning anxiety, which is basically comparing yourself to others. Like, why aren't I as successful, as disciplined, as fill in the blank as that person? Then we have choice anxiety, which is that feeling of being paralyzed by too many options.
Right.
Then there's environmental anxiety, which is that feeling of being trapped by your circumstances, feeling like you can't change your life because of your current situation. And last but not least is difficulty anxiety. And this one is basically that feeling you get when the task itself just feels totally overwhelming, like it's just too hard, so we give up before we even start. So we've got completion, positioning, choice, environmental, and difficulty anxiety. What's key here is that he doesn't just label these anxieties, he goes deeper, and he helps us to really understand the root cause, where they're coming from.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I have a feeling a lot of us can relate to at least one of those anxiety flavors, right? So what is the root cause?
Right. Well, what Ling brilliantly points out is that at the core of most of these anxieties is this disconnect. On one hand, we have this deep desire for instant gratification, and on the other, we have the reality that true, lasting growth, real change, takes time. He says it's kind of like wanting the results of a marathon without putting in the training.
Oh, 100%. I mean, come on, we live in a world obsessed with hacks and quick fixes, right?
Exactly.
And while logically I totally get that lasting change doesn't happen overnight, emotionally, I still want those results now. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we cultivate the kind of patience that's needed for real, meaningful, long-lasting self-improvement?
That, my friend, is where things get really interesting. Because Zhou Ling's take on patience is not what you might think. It's not about, forcing yourself to endure boredom or suffering through something you absolutely hate just to reach some distant finish line. It's interesting, actually, he connects this whole idea of instant gratification to the popularity of those wuxia stories. Those ones, right? Like those epic tales of martial arts masters who achieve these superhuman abilities almost overnight.
Oh, totally. Like those classic Jin Young novels?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of stumbling upon some secret scroll and suddenly becoming like an unbeatable kung fu master, that's definitely appealing.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that kind of shortcut to greatness?
Exactly. It taps into that primal desire we all have for instant results. But in reality, achieving true mastery, whether it's in martial arts or in any area of life, really is much more about what's called the compound effect.
Right, slow and steady wins the race, like the tortoise and the hare.
Exactly. The problem is, our brains are naturally drawn to that initial burst of speed, that quick progress we see at the beginning, and we crave that same kind of immediate satisfaction in all areas of our lives.
Which explains why we do things like abandon books halfway through, or give up on those New Year's resolutions, or constantly jump from one quick fix solution to the next. We're so used to seeing those instant transformations in stories that we get impatient when real life doesn't quite cooperate.
Exactly. And that's why Zhou Ling argues that true patience isn't about white-knuckling our way through something we hate. It's not about willpower alone. It's about understanding the natural stages of growth and learning to work with our brains, not against them.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this brain-friendly approach to patience.
Well, it starts with this idea of the comfort zone. That space where everything feels safe and familiar.
Right, the comfort zone. But isn't the whole point of self-improvement to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones?
It is, but it's about strategic expansion, not just recklessly leaping into the unknown. Think of it like stretching a muscle. You want to challenge it, of course, to help it grow stronger, but not to the point where you injure yourself, right? And just like that muscle needs time to recover and rebuild, our brains also need time to process and adapt and integrate all that new information and all those new skills.
So instead of constantly chasing that initial high of newness and rapid progress, we need to learn to embrace those plateaus, those moments where it feels like we're not moving forward as quickly as we want to.
Exactly. He talks about the non-linear nature of the learning curve, those periods of rapid growth followed by what might feel like ages of stagnation. But what's really interesting is that those plateaus, those periods of what seems like stagnation, are often when the real magic happens. Because behind the scenes, our brains are actually really busy. They're consolidating those new neural connections, laying the foundation for the next breakthrough.
It's funny, he talks about how those plateaus often trigger our impatience the most. We think, okay, wait, I'm putting in the effort, so why aren't I seeing the results? But what we don't realize is that's actually when we need to double down on patience. trusting that all those seemingly invisible changes are happening beneath the surface.
That's a great point. That's exactly right. And that's where this deeper understanding of patience comes in. It's not just about waiting it out, it's about recognizing that those plateaus aren't failures. They're actually an essential part of the process.
I love that. It takes the pressure off in a way, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because it allows us to actually enjoy the journey, plateaus and all.
I agree.
And speaking of journeys, the book also takes us on this really fascinating exploration of the subconscious mind.
Yes, and this is where things get really, really interesting. Because, Zhu Ling challenges that very common perception of the subconscious as this mysterious, even dangerous place.
To be honest, when I think about the subconscious, I always pictured it as this kind of murky basement, filled with, repressed memories and shadowy impulses. Not exactly a place you want to hang out in.
Yeah, I get that. I can totally see that. But Zhu Ling flips that script completely. Instead, he reveals the subconscious as this incredible powerhouse of wisdom and processing capability. In fact, get this, he says it operates at a speed of 275,000 times faster than our conscious mind.
Wait, 275,000 times? Seriously?
Yeah.
That's insane. So what is it doing with all that processing power? What's going on in there?
It's constantly absorbing information, picking up on all those subtle cues and patterns that our conscious mind often misses. It's almost like having a supercomputer running in the background, making lightning-fast calculations to keep us safe and to guide our decisions, even if we don't realize it.
It makes you wonder how much we miss out on by only paying attention to those conscious thoughts,
Exactly. And that's why Zhu Ling encourages us to figure out how to tap into this wellspring of subconscious wisdom. One technique he highlights is something he calls feeling-based learning.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Feeling-based learning, it sounds both intuitive and kind of mysterious. Tell me more.
It's about learning to pay attention to those moments when something you read or hear really resonates with you on a deep level. It's that aha moment, that feeling of, yes, this makes sense to me, this feels true.
So instead of just highlighting it and moving on,
Yeah.
You're saying we need to actually stop and ask ourselves why it resonated. What was it about that particular idea or that concept that sparked something within us?
Exactly. It's about asking, why did this stand out to me? What was it about that idea that struck a chord? And then most importantly, how can I actually apply this insight to my own life? It's almost like having a conversation with your subconscious. You're listening to its whispers, and then you're using your conscious mind to explore and apply those insights in a practical way.
It's like a dance, almost, between those two parts of ourselves, the intuitive, feeling-based subconscious and the analytical, action-oriented conscious mind. I love that. What other techniques does he suggest for tapping into this subconscious wisdom?
Another really powerful technique he talks about is paying attention to our first reactions. Those initial gut-level responses we have to people or to situations, to new ideas, all those things that happen before our conscious minds have a chance to filter them.
Oh, interesting. You mean those knee-jerk reactions that we often try to suppress or explain away? Like when you instantly dislike someone, but you're not even sure why?
Exactly. Zhu Ling points out that we often dismiss these first reactions as irrational or unimportant. But often, if we can learn to look a little bit closer, we often find that they can hold really valuable information. They can reveal our true passions, our deepest fears, even those deeply held beliefs that might be driving our behavior without us even realizing it.
So it's about becoming more aware of those really subtle internal signals, those gut feelings, those moments of resonance, and then having the courage to explore them, even if they don't immediately make sense. I'm starting to see how this all ties back to metacognition, which he talks about a lot in the book, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is where Zhu Ling brings it all together. He describes metacognition as that ability to think about our own thinking. It's like having a bird's eye view of our own minds, right? We can observe our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs as they come up without judging them.
It sounds incredibly powerful, but also kind of tricky. How do you step outside of your own mind to observe it? How is that even possible?
Right. Well, he emphasizes that we all possess at least some level of metacognitive ability. It's basically what allows us to learn and grow. But he says that the key difference lies in how actively we engage with it. He talks about the difference between active and passive metacognition.
So passive metacognition is like catching a glimpse of your thoughts in passing. Kind of like, oh, look at that thought, there it goes. Whereas active metacognition is more about actively engaging with those thoughts, right? Hold on a second, thought, where are you going? What are you doing?
Exactly.
It's kind of like with passive metacognition, we're just sort of along for the ride. Whereas with active metacognition, we're in the driver's seat, actually steering the car.
Right.
and making conscious choices about where we want to go and how we're going to get there, right?
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. And I think that's really where we can tap into the real power of metacognition.
Yeah.
It allows us to move beyond just being passive bystanders to our own thoughts and emotions and become the conscious creators of our lives.
He talks about this really interesting concept of developing an inner soulmate. Is that basically what we're talking about here, this actively engaged metacognitive part of ourselves?
Yes. I think that's a great way to think about it. It's like having this wise friend who's always there with you, helping you to make sense of your inner world. Someone who can offer a different perspective when you need it most. Someone who can help you challenge those old limiting beliefs that might be holding you back, and who can, gently remind you of your values when you get a little bit off track.
I love that image, this inner soulmate, always there to offer support and guidance. It makes this whole concept of metacognition feel a lot less intimidating and a lot more, approachable.
That's one of the things I appreciate most about how Zhu Ling approaches these concepts. He takes these potentially complex ideas and makes them feel very relatable and applicable to our everyday lives. And what's really cool is that he actually provides some very specific techniques that anyone can use to strengthen their metacognitive muscles, so to speak.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me those metacognitive workouts.
Well, one of the most powerful is simply seeking out wisdom. What I mean by that is, actively learning from the experiences and insights of others, whether it's through reading books or finding mentors or even just observing people we admire.
So it's about being a student of life, in a way, always being curious, always being open to new perspectives.
Exactly. And I think it's important to emphasize that it's not just about passively consuming information, it's about actively reflecting on what we're learning, asking ourselves how we can apply those insights to our own unique lives and situations.
I like that it's that active engagement that seems to be so key here.
It really is. And another powerful technique is taking the time to really reflect on our own experiences, both our successes and our failures, and trying to understand the why behind our choices and our actions.
So it's not enough to just replay those events in our heads, right?
Yeah.
We need to really dig beneath the surface to uncover those deeper lessons.
Exactly. It's about becoming our own best critics in a way, but in a compassionate and constructive way. Not beating ourselves up for our mistakes, but really trying to learn from them so we can make better choices moving forward.
And what about the third technique?
The third technique is mindfulness. And by that I mean really engaging in any kind of practice that cultivates present moment awareness, whether it's meditation or yoga, or even just taking a few moments each day to really focus on our breath.
Right, because when we're more present, when we're more aware of what's happening in the moment, we're better able to observe our thoughts and emotions without immediately getting swept away by them.
Exactly. Mindfulness is like strength training, but for our attention.
Yeah.
It's like we're training those attention muscles so we can consciously choose where we want to direct our energy and our focus.
So when we combine all of these practices, the seeking out wisdom, the reflecting on our experiences, and the cultivating mindfulness, we start to develop that inner soulmate, right? We start to strengthen that metacognitive muscle that allows us to become more conscious captains of our lives.
It's like we're no longer at the mercy of those waves of emotions and impulses. We have the skills and the self-awareness to navigate those rough seas a lot more effectively, even when challenges inevitably arise.
And that brings us back to this idea of meta time. Those crucial moments in our day when we're faced with a choice, any choice really.
Yes. These meta time moments are so important. Zhu Ling calls them the hinges of our day because they really can swing the direction of our lives, depending on the choices we make. They are those seemingly small decisions that we make throughout the day, like hitting the snooze button or getting out of bed when our alarm goes off, or reaching for our phone, or picking up a book, or saying yes to that obligation, or carving out some time for ourselves. It's in those seemingly small moments that the magic really happens.
What makes those moments so powerful is that they really do set the tone for the hours that follow. If we start our day by giving into that impulse to hit the snooze button, we're much more likely to continue making those reactive choices throughout the day. But if we just catch ourselves in those moments and make a different choice, a conscious choice, we can really shift our entire state of being.
And I think that's where that active metacognition becomes so crucial, because instead of just going on autopilot and just reacting to those moments based on our old habits and our old patterns, We can actually pause for a moment, we can reflect, and we can actually make a deliberate, conscious choice that's aligned with our values, with our goals, and with how we really want to show up in the world.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not about being perfect, right? Like, we're all human. We will all inevitably encounter those rough seas from time to time. It's about developing the skills and the self-awareness that we need to navigate those challenges more effectively with more grace and more resilience.
I love that. That's beautifully said.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into cognitive awakening, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question from the book. If your life is a ship, what kind of captain do you want to be? It's such a powerful question, I think. What do you think?
It really is. It's a question that invites each and every one of us to reflect on our values, on our goals, and on our own personal commitment to consciously charting our course through this journey we call life.
Because ultimately, this journey of self-improvement, this journey of personal growth and transformation isn't about reaching some predetermined destination, It's about becoming the best, most authentic versions of ourselves every single step of the way.
And learning to enjoy the journey, plateaus and all, right?
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep charting your own unique course.
I love it. It's a journey worth taking.